Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Kishore Kishori Ki Jai. Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Maharani Ki Jai. Gauni Tai Ki Jai. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Today there are two verses that are going to be looked at. Srimad Bhagavatam 10:43-15 and 10:43-16. So 15 is on the board. Mirtakam dvipam utrija. I know. Danta panihi samavisat. Amsanyasta vishano shrin. Mada bindubir ankitaha. Viruda sveda kanika. Vadanam Buruho Babho Mirtakam Dvipam Utrija Dantapanihi Samavishat Amsanyasta Vishano Shrin Mada Bindubir Ankitaha Viruda Sveta Kanika Vadanam Buruho Babo Mirtakam Dvipam Utrija Dantapanihi Samavishat Amsanyasta Vishano Shrin Mada Bindubir Ankitaha Viruda Sveta Kanika Vadanam Buruho Babo. Please chant. Mirtakam Dvipam Utrija Dantapanihi Samavishat Amsanyasta Vishano Shrin Mada Bindubir Ankitaha Viruda Sveta Kanika Vadanam Buruho Babo. Thank you. The word for word, Mirtakam, dead. Dvipam, the elephant. Utrija, discarding. Danta, his tusk. Panihi, in his hand. Samavishat, he entered the arena. Amsa, upon his shoulder. Nyasta, placing. Vishanaha, the tusk. I don't know if my computer's changed this. It might be asterisk, not sure. Of blood. Mana, and the elephant's sweat. Bindubi, with drops. Ankita, sprinkled. Viruda, exuding. Sveda, of his own. Perspiration. Kanika, with fine drops. Adana, his face. Sorry, Vadana, thank you. My computer changes things. Amburu, Buruha, lotus-like. Babha, shun. And text 6, I should read the translation for text 15. Leaving the dead elephant aside, Lord Krishna held onto the tusk and entered the wrestling arena. With the tusk resting on his shoulder, drops of the elephant's blood and sweat sprinkled all over him, and his lotus face covered with fine drops of his own perspiration. The Lord shone with great beauty. Text 16. Virito Gopai Kalipayar Baladeva Janardana Rangam Vivishatu Rajan Gajadanta Varayudao. And the translation for text 16. My dear King, Lord Baladev and Lord Janardana, each carrying one of the elephant's tusks on as his chosen weapon, entered the arena with several cowherd boys. Om Gyanatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Sha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Pada Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagat Pate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpitsaribhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimati Roma Padaswami Iti Namine Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I'm going to read the way that Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur presents text 15, because he, in addition to saying much the same thing of text 15 as it's put here by Srila Sukadev Goswami, he also gives a title, so to speak, to this picture that's presented by Krishna after his killing the beast and the keeper. So here follows the description of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. So quoting, with the elephant's tusk perched on his shoulder, Amsaniasta Vishano that we'd read, fine particles of perspiration like drops of dew on his lotus face, and the drops of blood and ichor sprinkled from the elephant, Krishna's body glistened with beauty and appeared the epitome of chivalry or heroism. So that comes from Sarata Darshini. So if one considers like a beautiful painting, generally there's a title to the beautiful painting, and in one sense, this picture that's presented of Krishna by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, it's got a title, and the title would be Chivalry, Heroism. So I've done collections of photographs because I find it a wonderful means for self-expression to do visuals. So often I have to think of titles for pictures. So I find I can truly relate to this very graphic description and then the titling for it. Now, in contemplating this titled picture of heroism, one can digress momentarily. And I'm digressing to Patanjali because he does an exploration of meditative absorption. He gives a particular sutra. This is the sutra. Pratya Yakshanumanganaha Pramanani. And this sutra is translated as right knowledge consists of sense perception, logic, and verbal testimony. And I'm particularly going to look at one source of knowledge, and that is verbal testimony. So, and the reason I'm going to look at that is because even though one could say that looking at a picture, one's utilizing senses, so there's some sense perception, we actually are reading this description. So there's verbal testimony that's been given of this beautiful picture presented by Krishna. So verbal testimony, if it's defined, consists of the relaying of accurate information through the medium of words by a trustworthy person who has perceived or who has inferred the existence of a particular object to someone else who hasn't perceived the existence of that particular object. Now, Vyasadeva defines a trustworthy person as somebody whose statements cannot be contradicted. And there's another source for the definition of a trustworthy person, and that is coming from Vachaspati Muni, who adds that such a person should have very keen sense organs, should be trustworthy and compassionate. So it's not such a straightforward thing to receive verbal testimony. One really has to consider what the source of that verbal testimony is. Then there's, this is coming from Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. So I'm not familiar with this personality, but he's listed as adding to this definition of a trustworthy person or somebody whose verbal testimony can be taken. And it's somebody called Vijnana Bhikshu, who I'm not familiar with. He states that a reliable and trustworthy person is one who is free from defects such as illusion, laziness, deceit, dull-wittedness, etc. So the reason for these defining criteria being met is that the words of such a reliable authority, they enter the ear and they produce an image in the mind of the hearer that corresponds to that image or the vritti experienced by that trustworthy source who's giving that verbal testimony. So one can see how important it is that one considers the source where something is coming from, that verbal testimony, because it's actually going to produce a corresponding image in one's mind. So for instance, a very thoughtless person who may not be free from illusion, such a person may very casually label another person in a particular way. So in this image, we're understanding the image is being labeled heroism, but somebody may very casually label somebody else, whatever derogatory term label may be used, lazy, indecent, whatever it is. And you can see that it's going to produce an image immediately in the mind. So it's very, very important that one considers that the testimony coming from somebody is that person is truly a trustworthy person. So hence I'm entering into this examination of what a trustworthy person is. Now, the exploration into Patanjali's reasoning is significant in that this description by Srila Sukadeva Goswami to Maharaj Parikshit and that of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur to us is such that we as persons receiving this information in this manner, we have neither personally experienced nor have we inferred the existence of this object of knowledge. So we're getting a whole picture presented to us. This picture of perspiration being on the lotus-like face of Krishna, his body having drops of blood and drops ichor, or the sweat of the elephant, on his body, and that is presenting a picture of great beauty. So, so that object of knowledge is Lord Krishna in this visual description, titled Heroism and Chivalry. So valid knowledge of the object, meaning Lord Krishna in this description, it is achieved because of the fact that we're receiving this information from persons that have personally experienced and have inferred the existence of Lord Krishna in this heroic state, meaning Sukadeva Goswami and also Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Now, if a trustworthy person, this is going back to the definition by Srila Vyasadeva, if a trustworthy person is somebody whose statements cannot be contradicted, particularly in relation to Lord Krishna, then since Bhagavad Gita and all Vedic literature, meaning the Srimad Bhagavatam in particular in this case, centers around the declaration that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then that person understands a supreme reality. So I'm using logic. Indeed, Srila Sukadeva Goswami, who's the speaker of this description of Lord Krishna, is someone who puts into perspective the glory of the Bhagavatam. And he makes clear this understanding of the supreme reality. So I'm going to read his opening statement at the start of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Completely rejecting all religious activities that are materially motivated, the Bhagavad Purana propounds the highest truth, which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart. The highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. Such truth uproots the threefold miseries. This beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the sage Vyasadeva in his maturity, is sufficient in itself for God realization. What is the use of any other scripture? As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam, by the culture of knowledge, the Supreme Lord is established within the heart. So clearly, Srila Sukadeva Goswami is that trustworthy person whose statements cannot be contradicted. So this is the opening, second opening statement to the Srimad Bhagavatam made by Sukadeva Goswami. So clearly he's in contact with that supreme reality. So hence he can easily say that the Bhagavatam is distinguishing reality from illusion. Now, the connection that can be made as to the effect of hearing the message of Bhagavatam, Lord Krishna makes a particular statement, and I'm drawing from Bhagavad Gita. When one's intelligence, mind, faith, and refuge are all fixed in the Supreme, then one becomes fully cleansed of misgivings through complete knowledge and thus proceeds straight on the path of liberation. This is Bhagavad Gita 5:17. I'm just going to read it. Tad buddhayas tad atman na tan nishtas tad parayana gajanti apunar avritim jnana niruddha kalmasaha. So this picture of Lord Krishna, this great beauty with the tusk resting on his shoulder, the drops of the elephant's blood and sweat sprinkled all over him, and his lotus face covered with fine drops of his own perspiration, and the fact that he's shining with great beauty, this can be immediately fixed in the heart of the devotee. just by hearing it, provided one's mind, one's faith, and one's refuge are fixed in Lord Krishna. So we're getting the verbal testimony, it's having that correct impact, it's actually going to be immediately fixed in the heart of the devotee. So the reason this is so is because it is worshipping the Supreme Lord. And the Bhagavatam being the total body of the Lord, and the reason for that is that the Bhagavatam only mentions the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In other Puranas, there's mention of ways of worshipping or different methods of worshipping the demigods. But in the Bhagavatam Purana, it's only the Supreme Lord that's mentioned. Now, Srila Prabhupada, being in perfect knowledge of everything concerning transcendence, because clearly he has his intelligence, mind, faith, and refuge all fixed in the Supreme Lord, he explains what this quality of heroism that's exhibited by Krishna in this extraordinary description actually looks like. So I'm drawing from Nectar of Devotion where Srila Prabhupada is writing. And he says, that generally this heroism is looked at in terms of something of the strength of Krishna's body. So there's similes that are used. So he says, here's one of them. My dear killer of the enemy, just as the elephant, while taking bath in the lake, destroys all the lotus stems within the water by swinging its trunk, so simply by moving your arms, which are compared to the trunks of elephants, you have killed so many lotus-like enemies. So it's interesting because in this case, Lord Krishna had seized the literal elephant's trunk with one hand. In fact, it was his left hand, and he threw him to the ground. And it's interesting because the comparison of Krishna's arms is that they're as strong as the trunks of elephants. So that elephant met his match. In fact, it's great, in fact, of course, Krishna's strength, but in terms of the comparison to understand something of the heroic nature of Krishna. And Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti states that actually this action of Lord Krishna of grabbing the elephant's trunk with his left hand, it was done in a very nonchalant manner. And it was done by Krishna because Krishna suddenly noticed the time was passing. So we heard how he was being very playful, hiding behind the legs of the elephant trying to perceive him with his sense of smell, moving ahead just enough for the elephant to sort of touch him but never quite get to him, and then even playfully rolling onto the ground, and the elephant thinking he's finally got Krishna and using his tusk but only hitting the earth. So Krishna always been a little bit ahead. So through all these actions, at this particular moment when Krishna decided to grab the elephant's trunk using his elephant trunk-like arm, it was because he thought time is passing, because he has to enter the arena. So he concluded his sporting activity with Kuvalyapida. There's just one little aside that I'm going to add here, and that is that this nonchalant attitude, it's rather fascinating because actually the mass of an elephant is 8,800 pounds. So Krishna grabbed that trunk and threw those 8,800 pounds to the ground. It's rather extraordinary. So Lord Krishna is also understood, so this is all to paint this picture of heroism given by Srila Prabhupada. Lord Krishna is also understood to possess the quality of having beautiful bodily features. And again, knowledge given by Srila Prabhupada, who possesses all knowledge concerning transcendence, he states that ordinary persons who cannot understand how exalted are the bodily features of Lord Krishna, they're assisted to do so by material comparison. So Lord Krishna's face, here's a simile, is as beautiful as the moon. And in this particular description, the beauty of his face is enhanced by the fine drops of his own perspiration. So if the face is very luminous, like the moon, there's like this very fine dew glistening on that luminosity. And his thighs, Srila Prabhupada writes, can be compared. And again, it's interesting because the comparison is so much, the emphasis is on strength. So his thighs are compared to the trunks of elephants, again, in terms of their power. And in this particular account of the fight with Kuvalyapida, it's the elephant's trunk, which was the prime body part being used to attack Lord Krishna. And this is the description. Once again, Kuvalyapida seized the Lord with the end of his trunk, only to have the Lord forcefully free himself. So the power, when there's the matter of Krishna's body being seized by the elephant with his trunk, the most powerful part of his body, which he's using as the prime instrument for attacking Krishna, we're hearing that Krishna's thighs are as powerful as that trunk, so he has no problem to free himself, using the strength in that way. And finally, the Lord uses that part of the elephant's body to bring the sporting to an end, as I described a little earlier. So the Supreme Lord, killer of the demon Madhu, this is the description, confronted the elephant as he attacked. Seizing the trunk with one hand, Krishna threw him to the ground. So Srila Prabhupada uses a further simile to look at this point of the beauty of Krishna. His arms are like two pillars. So pillars, give great support to a building, like in this, even in the room that we're in, there's pillars supporting the whole structure. So Krishna's arms are like pillars. They, foundational. They support everything. And his chest is like a doorway. So it's open. And his hips are like dens, and the middle of his body is a terrace. So some of the similes, I should say his body is like a terrace, since these are similes that are being used by Srila Prabhupada. Now, Srila Baladev Vidyabhusan, he states that when one is meditating on the qualities of the Lord within the heart, so we've been trying to look at two of these qualities of the Lord, because these are listed as his qualities, his heroism, his beauty. When one's meditating on these qualities of the Lord within the heart, the result is that one understands, and this is very interesting, one understands his sense of justice. And this is from a commentary on the same verse I read from Bhagavad Gita that highlights the necessity for the hearer to have his mind and his intelligence and his faith have their refuge in Lord Krishna. So just contemplating these qualities of the Lord allows one to get an understanding of his sense of justice. Now this happens first because the devotee's intellect becomes convinced of such qualities of the Lord. And this being convinced of the qualities of the Lord, it's within the heart, just because of the fact that one's taken refuge within Krishna. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he explains that a person through natural knowledge, experiences attraction for the Lord. This is known as hearing the songs of the Lord. So just being attracted is like hearing songs about the Lord. But realizing Krishna further, because like we're trying to do, we're scrutinizingly studying this description of his form narrated in the scripture by persons who have seen Krishna. This is called hearing the qualities of Krishna. So that's what we've been engaged in, and it's allowing for this realization, this image to be imprinted in the heart. And this is the statement of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, which is the Sanskrit for his saying that realizing Krishna after scrutinizingly studying descriptions of his form narrated in the scriptures by persons who have seen Krishna is called hearing the qualities of Krishna. So if we had just read the statement in Srimad Bhagavatam, this description, and the fact that we know that's coming from Srila Sukadeva Goswami, means that we are actually hearing the quality of Krishna. We're hearing the heroism. And this is the Sanskrit where Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur states this. Pratimam sahajam gyanam trayam koshalam vishve dvityam shastra varnanam Krishnaya chesa rupina. That's from Krishna Samhita, text 17. So in one sense, scrutinizingly studying the description of his form, as done by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, by one who has seen Krishna, is hearing the qualities of Krishna. That is, he has heard Krishna's qualities of heroism and chivalry. And that's why in the purport, or in the description that I read of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he explicitly states heroism. But now we're understanding why he can actually state that even if it had just been the description, just by hearing from him, we would be understanding that quality is there, the heroism. So that was the point of this exploration. Now, a trustworthy person, going further into looking at, who you actually hear from, a trustworthy person needs to be free from illusion. That was one of the statements made in the Patanjali Sutra. This means that the person does not have a sense of existence separate from Krishna. That is the trustworthy person. Because if the person has a sense of existence separate from Krishna, the person is factually in Maya, so to speak, is in the illusory energy. So it means that if one does not have, if one is understanding that one does not have an existence separate from Krishna, then that means that whatever temporary bodily relations one has with others, one would not be seeing them as more important than one's actual eternal spiritual relationship with Lord Krishna. In fact, if a person were to think that in a way that he was not seeing his eternal spiritual relationship with Krishna as being the most important thing, then he would not be able to see Krishna. So that's one of these important criteria that needs to be met by a person who's actually giving information about a worshipable object, so to speak, such as Krishna. Can't be in a state of illusion, because then that person cannot see Krishna. Because Krishna can't be seen by persons who are under the shelter of Maya. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in Sri Krishna Samhita, he's the one who's explaining this. Now, by contrast, persons who are meditating on the qualities of the Lord within the heart, they actually have the Lord become their only goal, and they completely surrender to him. and this is Srila Baladev Vijayabhusan, because they start to become cleansed of any misconceptions. And just by getting this knowledge of Krishna's good qualities. And the one that was mentioned, that even in this particular description, we start to get a sense of the justice of Krishna. And it's highlighted in the second verse we read today, where we get a sense of the justice of the whole thing. Because the description is, this was text 16, "My dear king, Lord Baladev and Lord Janardana, each carrying one of the elephant's tusks as his chosen weapon, entered the arena with several cowherd boys." So this is why that sense of justice finally comes through meditating on this heroic quality of Krishna and Balaram, of course, is that these tusks, that each of them is carrying one of the tusks of Kuvalyapida on his shoulder, entering this arena. The fact is that those tusks belonged to Kuvalyapida, a creature who had come there to kill them. So now they are going to be using those same tusks as weapons to do their next fight. So there's an upcoming fight, and we're going to hear about that. So there's a sense of justice. You know, they came unarmed. They're coming as guests, about to enter the arena where they've been supposedly invited by the king for a festive occasion, but they're actually blocked from entering the arena and there's an attempt to kill them. So there's certainly justice to be entering the arena carrying a tusk on each shoulder. Very heroic. So these were some thoughts on these two verses. If you have any thoughts that comes to mind from... Take the microphone because it can be... The blood, the question raised was the blood on Krishna's face, because I had brought up blood. The description is that the blood was on his, drops of blood were on his body, no mention of blood being on his face. On his face was merely his own, so anything from the elephant, the drops of blood and the sweat from the elephant was on the body. But Krishna's lotus face, it wasn't marred by any of that. The beautiful luminosity of the face just had very fine dew-like perspiration that belonged to him from his exertion. So yeah, it's interesting, that point, just that you asked that, because the face always expresses the beauty the most. So for it not to be marred by something bloody makes perfect sense. So it's interesting that perfection of Krishna that is kept below the face. Anything that came, what could one say, the fluid from the elephant in this jewel, yeah, below the face. Yes, it's interesting. Krishna's perfection and control of everything, that the face does not have that. Yeah, very nice point. Thank you for highlighting that. Yes, it adds to his great beauty, which is one of the two qualities that certainly emerge in this beautiful description given by Sukadev Goswami and Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ki jai.